Nobody had told her she could do it. Nobody had told her she couldn't. She just stood up, at 7 years old, in the middle of a television taping, and did the thing that made 300 strangers go completely silent and Steve Harvey forget every word he had ever prepared. Her name was Ruby, and what she did that afternoon did not make the first cut of the episode. It made the entire episode. 6 months later, when the segment producer was asked in an interview what she remembered most about that taping, she said, "A little girl remade a room. I've been doing this job for 19 years, and I have never seen anything like it." The date was September 22nd, 2021. The studio was Trillet in Atlanta, and the man standing at the podium, the man Ruby had crossed the stage for, the man whose face had gone still in a way that had nothing to do with the game, was her father. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 44 years old. He was from Memphis, Tennessee. He had a voice like a Sunday sermon and a laugh that arrived without warning and took the whole room with it. He had 5 daughters: Jasmine, 22, Brianna, 19, Simone, 16, Alisa, 14, and Ruby, who had turned 7 in June and who had, from the moment she could form opinions, treated her father with a specific and total devotion that her older sisters described affectionately and accurately as a religion. It had been raising all 5 of them alone for 9 years. Their mother, Vanessa, had left on a Tuesday in March of 2012. Not violently, not dramatically. She had packed 2 bags and put them in the back of a car and driven away from the house in Memphis, while Marcus was at work and the older girls were at school, and Ruby had not yet been born. And Alisa, who was 5, was at a neighbor's house. She had called Marcus that evening. The conversation had lasted 4 minutes. She had said she was not coming back. She had said she was sorry. She had not said where she was going. She had not contacted the children since. Marcus had come home from work to an empty house and a neighbor's door, and 5-year-old Alisa sitting on the front step with her backpack on, waiting. Because Alisa had always been a child who waited for her father with complete confidence that he was coming. He had picked her up and carried her inside and fed her dinner and put her to bed, and then sat at the kitchen table in the particular silence of a man whose life has just been divided into before and after. And he had stayed there until the numbers on the microwave clock said 2:47 in the morning. He had not told Jasmine and Brianna and Simone the full truth that first week. He had told them their mother needed some time away. He had said it the same way every day for 7 days, with the same steady voice, the same direct eyes, and on the 8th day, Jasmine, who was 13 and had always been the child most like him, meaning she could tell the difference between truth and managed truth, had come to him after school and said, "She's not coming back, is she?" He had looked at his oldest daughter for a long moment. He had said, "No, baby, I don't think so." Jasmine had nodded. She had gone to her room. She had come back out 20 minutes later and asked what was for dinner, and Marcus had understood, in the way of a father who knows his children, that she had gone to her room to put the grief somewhere it wouldn't crush the younger ones, and had come back out to help. She had been 13 years old, and she had made that choice without being asked. He had thought about that moment every day since. He had discovered he was expecting Ruby 6 weeks after Vanessa left. The pregnancy was not new information. Vanessa had known, which Marcus understood later was part of the calculus of her leaving when she did, and it meant that the 5-person unit he was building had 1 more person arriving in December. He had told the girls at the kitchen table with the same directness he brought to everything. Simone, who was 9, had said, "Is it a boy?" Marcus had said he didn't know yet. Simone had said, "I hope it's a girl," as if it were that simple, as if the family simply needed 1 more. It had been a girl. He had named her Ruby because Vanessa had chosen all the other girls' names and he had agreed to all of them happily, and this time there was no one to consult and he had sat in the hospital with his newborn daughter and thought about his grandmother, Dorothy Mae Webb, who had raised 6 children on a sharecropper's wage in Mississippi, and who had told Marcus once, when he was 12, that hard times were just the price of a life worth living. Her favorite stone had been the ruby. He had written the name on the birth certificate form and had not second-guessed it. It had brought Ruby home to 4 sisters who received her with the collective focused energy of people who have been waiting for something important and are not planning to let it down. Jasmine had held her first standing with her back straight and her arms careful the way Marcus had shown her, and had looked at Ruby for a long moment with an expression Marcus would describe years later as the moment he understood his family was going to be fine. He had not known, standing in that living room in Memphis in December of 2012, what fine was going to cost him. It was going to cost him the coaching job he had been offered at a school in Nashville, because Nashville was 4 hours from the girls' school and he was not moving them. It was going to cost him 8 years of overnight shifts at a distribution warehouse so his days were free for school pickups and doctor's appointments and the particular emergencies of raising 5 daughters that nobody had written a manual for, the 6 a.m. hair crisis before picture day, the science fair project that was due tomorrow and had not been started, the night Simone was 16 and called him crying from a party, and he had driven 40 minutes to get her without asking a single question until she was in the car and safe. He was going to cost him the relationship he had started in 2016 with a woman named Carla, who was kind and patient and had, after 14 months, told him gently that she did not think she would ever be first in his life. And Marcus had looked at her and said, honestly, that she was right, and Carla had said she respected him for saying it. And they had ended things without anger, and Marcus had driven home and checked on all 5 girls before he sat down. He had told no one at work about any of this. He had told his mother, his own mother, Dolores, who had moved from Memphis to Atlanta in 2015 and who prayed for him every morning, which Marcus knew because she had told him and because he could feel it, and he had told his pastor. He had told no one else. When his co-workers asked about his family, he said he had 5 daughters, and they usually laughed and said something about being outnumbered, and Marcus laughed with them and did not explain what outnumbered actually looked like from the inside. He had applied to Family Feud because Alisa had made him. That was the only accurate way to say it. Alisa was 14, organized, and had developed in the preceding year a habit of researching opportunities she believed her father deserved and presenting them to him as fate's accomplice. She had found the application, filled out the preliminary form, and presented Marcus with a printed summary at dinner. One evening, alongside a list of reasons he should agree, which included the potential prize money, the fact that all 5 of them could appear together, and the phrase, "it would be good for morale," which she had apparently gotten from a management book she had no business reading at 14. Marcus had read the summary. He had looked at his 5 daughters seated around the table, Jasmine home from college for the weekend, Brianna on her phone but listening, Simone already nodding, Alisa waiting with the patience of someone who knows she has made an unanswerable argument, and Ruby, who was 6 at the time and was eating her food with a spoon, because she preferred spoons and nobody had ever successfully explained to her why this was unusual. He had said, "All right." Ruby had bumped her fist. The application had been accepted 3 months later. The taping was scheduled for September. Ruby had turned 7 in June. By September, she had been preparing for the show with the focused intensity of a child who has decided this matters, which for Ruby meant sitting at the kitchen table every evening while Alisa ran practice rounds and answering the survey questions with the deadpan certainty of someone who has strong opinions about what most people would do in any given situation. She was correct with surprising frequency. Marcus had started asking her opinion on the harder ones. The Webbs had arrived at 3-Lit Studios at 11 in the morning. Marcus had worn the blue suit his mother Dolores had pressed for him. Jasmine had done Ruby's hair. Ruby had surveyed the studio with the expression of someone conducting a professional assessment and had declared it good, which the stage manager who had overheard had found funny enough to repeat to the segment producer. Steve Harvey had come out, and the Webbs had come out, and Steve had looked at Marcus and his 5 daughters standing in a line and had said, "Sir, I have questions. Starting with, how are you still standing?" The audience laughed. Marcus laughed. His daughters laughed with the easy fluency of people who had heard some version of this joke for years and found it genuinely funny each time because their father found it funny. And his laugh was the kind that made laughing feel like the obvious choice. The game had run for 3 rounds. The Webbs were good, quick, coordinated, feeding each other answers with the wordless efficiency of a family that had spent years at the same kitchen table. Marcus was the anchor, Alisa the strategist, Jasmine the calm, Briella and Simone were fast. Ruby stood at the end of the line and watched everything with the focused attention she brought to all important situations, answering when called on and retreating into observation when not. Her eyes moving between the board and her father with a steady rotation of someone monitoring two things at once. Then came the question that changed everything. The category was family. The survey question, delivered by Steve Harvey with his usual easy setup, was, name the most important thing a parent can give a child. Marcos answered fast. Love. The audience responded before the board did. The answer was there. Number 1. Steve Harvey looked at Marcus. He said, and you know something about that, don't you? It was a hosting question, the kind Steve asked 100 times a season. Genial, inviting, designed to draw out a good television moment. He did not know what he was opening. Marcus sighed simply, I try my best. Steve said, these your daughters? Marcus said, all 5 of them. Steve said, all 5 here tonight. Marcus said yes. Steve Harvey looked down the line. He stopped at Ruby. He said, and what's your name, sweetheart? Ruby said, Ruby Webb, like she was signing a document. Steve Harvey smiled at her. He said, how old are you, Ruby? Ruby said, 7. She paused. I'll be 8 in June. Steve sighed. You know, I got to ask you something. What is the most important thing your daddy has given you? Ruby looked at Steve Harvey. She looked at her father. She looked at Steve Harvey again. And then she did something nobody on that stage, including Marcus, had anticipated. She left the podium. She walked across the stage, not hurrying, not performing, in the direct, unhurried way of someone going somewhere they have already decided to go. And she stood in front of her father, and she held her arms up. The way a child holds their arms up when they want to be picked up. The universal, ancient gesture. Not theatrical, not for the camera. For him. The studio fell completely silent. Marcus Webb looked at his youngest daughter's upstretched arms for 1 second. Then he picked her up. She put both arms around his neck and held on. And he held on back. And he turned his face away from the audience, and his shoulders moved once. 300 people did not make a sound. A camera operator who had covered live television on 4 continents stood at his equipment and did not look through his viewfinder. Steve Harvey stood 4 feet away with his cards at his side and his mouth slightly open and said nothing. He wasn't ready to speak yet. The studio fell completely silent a second time. A different silence than the first. Deeper. The kind that arrives when a room has just understood something it cannot understand. Ruby had not answered the question. She had answered it completely. Steve Harvey took 2 slow steps back. His hand found the edge of his podium. He looked at Marcus holding Ruby, this man in the blue suit his mother had pressed. This man who had driven 40 minutes in the night without asking questions. This man who had named his daughter after his grandmother's favorite stone and brought her home to 4 sisters who were ready. And Steve Harvey pressed his handkerchief to his face and breathed through it for a moment. When he lowered it, his eyes were wet, and he did not do anything about that. He said still quietly, brother, it wasn't done. He asked Marcus to stay where he was. He walked to the front of the stage and he looked at the camera, and he said, I want to talk to everyone watching at home. There is a man on this stage who has been raising 5 daughters by himself for 9 years. He worked nights, so his days were free for them. He gave up a coaching job so they wouldn't have to move. He drove 40 minutes in the dark without asking why. He named the last one Ruby. He stopped, and his youngest daughter just told us everything we needed to know about how he did it. She didn't use a single word. He paused. That little girl just gave her daddy the answer to his own survey question. The studio fell completely silent for the 3rd time, in the way of a room that has just been given a sentence it will carry home. But Steve wasn't done. He announced the full prize for the Webb family, effective immediately. Then he told Marcus, directly looking at him with Ruby still in his arms, that the show's foundation had been in contact with a college scholarship fund specifically supporting children raised in single-parent households. All 5 Webb daughters were eligible. Jasmine, already in college, would receive a supplemental scholarship toward her final year. The younger 4 had accounts established in their names, growing until they needed them. Marcus stood very still. He looked at Steve Harvey for a long moment. He said, I don't know what to say. Steve Harvey said, "You don't have to say anything. Ruby already said it." The opposing family, the Hendersons from Charlotte, two sisters in their 50s named Veronica and Clarice, who had come with their adult children and had watched the entire sequence from the other side of the stage with the still, open attention of women who know when to stop competing and start witnessing, crossed without ceremony. Veronica Henderson put her hand on Marcus's shoulder and said nothing. Clarice crouched down to Ruby's level. Ruby still held in her father's arms and said, "You are something else, you know that?" Ruby considered this and said, "I know." The audience laughed, the released, full laughter of 300 people who needed somewhere for everything to go, and the room came back to itself slowly, warm, changed. Faith had been in that studio all afternoon, in the way it is sometimes present in rooms where people are honest with each other. Marcus had prayed that morning in the car, the way he prayed every morning, a short and specific prayer that his mother had taught him. "Just keep them safe and keep me able." He had been saying it for 9 years, in the car at 5 a.m. before the overnight shift, in parking lots outside school plays, in a Memphis hospital in December of 2012, with a newborn girl named Ruby. He had said it that morning in the rental car outside Trillet Studios, with all 5 daughters asleep in the seats around him, and he had sat there for a moment before waking them, just looking at them, and had felt the prayer answered in advance the way it sometimes was when he paid attention. Steve Harvey walked to the edge of the stage. He stood there a moment, then had turned back and looked at Marcus, who had set Ruby down now, but who still had one hand on top of her head, the way fathers keep a hand on the person they love most in the room. Steve Harvey said, to all of them, to the whole room, "This is what it looks like." When the episode aired on December 14th, 2021, the clip of Ruby leaving the podium reached 18 million views in 48 hours. It trended in 14 countries. A child psychologist quoted in a follow-up piece said the gesture, a 7-year-old child crossing a stage to ask to be held publicly, on television, in response to a survey question, was one of the most direct expressions of secure attachment she had seen documented. The clip was used with the family's permission in a parenting workshop curriculum in 3 states. 3 months after the taping, Jasmine Webb graduated from Tennessee State University. Marcus drove to Nashville for the ceremony with all 4 remaining girls in the car. He sat in the bleachers in the blue suit his mother had pressed again and watched his oldest daughter walk across the stage, and he did not try to manage his face. A year after the taping, Alisa had started her own application for Family Feud. For a different reason, she explained to Marcus, pulling out her printed summary. He had read it. He had looked at her. He had said, "Baby, there is no show big enough for you." Alisa had put that on her vision board. It was still there. Today, Marcus Webb is 47. He still works in Memphis. Simone is in college on the scholarship established that night at Trilith. Brianna is 22 and works in healthcare. Jasmine is 25 and is applying to graduate school. Alisa is 17 and has already been accepted to 2 universities and has opinions about both. Ruby is 10. She still prefers spoons. She still treats her father with specific and total devotion that her sisters still describe accurately as a religion. She has not changed in this respect and shows no signs of changing. She does not think she did anything remarkable that evening in Atlanta. She has said so when her sisters bring it up. She says she just answered the question the way she knew how. She is correct. That is exactly what she did. Some questions cannot be answered with a word. Some answers require you to cross a room, hold your arms up, and show the person standing there what their years have built. Not in spite of the hard mornings and the overnight shifts and the parking lot prayers, but because of them. Because those are the things that make a pair of arms something worth reaching for. Marcus Webb has kept the blue suit. It fits the same as it did. He has worn it twice since, once to Jasmine's graduation, and once to a ceremony at Ruby's school where she received an award for something he does not remember, because he was looking at her face when they called her name, and that was the only thing he needed to see. A still standing. Nobody who looked at him that afternoon would have doubted it for a moment. If this story about a man who gave everything and the 7-year-old who showed the whole world what that looked like moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the best things we do for the people we love are rarely the things we announce. Have you ever witnessed a moment of pure, uncalculated love that stopped you completely? Let us know in the comments. And ring that notification bell for more stories about the quiet kind of extraordinary.